Far away from the busy cities, deep in the heart of Africa, there was a small and mysterious village surrounded by endless golden savannas. Tall acacia trees stood quietly across the land, their wide branches spreading like open arms under the bright African sky. During the day, the warm sun covered the village with golden light, and at night, thousands of stars sparkled above like tiny diamonds. The village looked peaceful from the outside. Small huts made of clay and straw stood close together along narrow, dusty paths. Children played near the wells, and women carried water pots on their heads while returning from the river. Men worked in the nearby fields or guided their cattle across the open plains. But there was something unusual about this village. Every single person in the village wore black clothes. From the youngest child to the oldest elder, everyone dressed only in black. Black shirts, black dresses, black scarves. No other color could be seen anywhere. Travelers who passed through the village often found it strange. They would ask the villagers why no one wore bright colors like red, blue, or green. But whenever the question was asked, the villagers became quiet. Some simply shook their heads, while others quickly changed the subject. The elders of the village believed in a very old tradition. According to them, many years ago a terrible tragedy had struck the village. After that day, the people decided that wearing black would protect them from future misfortune. So the tradition continued for generations. No one dared to question it. No one dared to break it. But soon, in this quiet and colorless village, one brave girl would begin to wonder why the world outside was full of colors, while her village lived only in black. For many generations, the people of the village followed the same strange rule without questioning it. Every man, woman, and child wore black clothing every single day. It had become such a normal part of life that most villagers no longer even thought about it. But the elders of the village remembered the story behind this tradition. Long ago, before the current generation was born, the village had once been full of colors. People wore bright clothes during festivals, children played with colorful fabrics, and the entire place looked lively and joyful. But according to the old stories, something terrible happened one year. A great misfortune struck the village. Crops failed, storms damaged many homes, and several families suffered great losses. The villagers became frightened and believed that the bright celebrations had somehow angered the spirits of the land. In their fear, the elders gathered together under the largest acacia tree in the village. After long discussions, they made a decision that would change the village forever. From that day forward, everyone would wear only black clothing. They believed black would show respect, humility, and protection from future disasters. The elders told the villagers that bright colors might bring bad luck again. Because of this belief, the colorful fabrics slowly disappeared from the village. Years passed, and then decades. The story was repeated again and again to the younger generations until it became an unquestioned truth. Children grew up believing that wearing colors was dangerous. Many of them had never even seen bright clothing before. To them, the world had always been black and quiet. The villagers obeyed the tradition faithfully, never daring to challenge the old rule. But one day, someone would finally begin to ask a simple question that no one had asked in many years. Among the villagers lived a young girl named Zola. She was different from the other children in many ways. While most people in the village simply followed the traditions they had been taught, Zola often asked questions that others were too afraid to ask. Zola lived with her grandmother in a small clay hut near the edge of the village. Every morning she helped with daily chores, fetching water from the well, gathering firewood, and helping prepare meals. Like everyone else, she also wore black clothes every day. But deep inside, Zola always felt curious about the world beyond the village. Sometimes she would walk to the top of a nearby hill and look out across the wide African plains. From there she could see the beautiful colors of nature. The sky was bright blue during the day and turned orange and pink during sunset. The grasslands glowed golden under the sun, and colorful birds flew freely through the air. Zola often wondered why nature was filled with so many beautiful colors while her village allowed only one. One day she asked her grandmother, "Grandmother, why do we always wear black? Why can't we wear colors like the sky or the flowers?" Her grandmother looked at her carefully before answering. "It is our tradition," she said softly. "Our elders say it keeps the village safe." But Zola was not fully satisfied with that answer. As she walked through the village, She noticed that many people followed the rule without really understanding it. They wore black because their parents had worn black and their grandparents before them. Yet Zola felt something inside her heart telling her that life should not be so colorless. She did not know it yet, but her curiosity would soon lead her to discover something hidden, something that would change the entire village forever. One quiet afternoon, the warm African sun shone softly over the village as Zola helped her grandmother clean their small clay hut. Dust floated gently through the air as they moved old baskets and wooden tools from one corner to another. Zola enjoyed helping her grandmother, but that day something unexpected caught her attention. In the darkest corner of the hut, partly hidden under an old woven mat, Zola noticed a small wooden chest. It looked very old, its surface covered with dust and faint carvings that had almost faded with time. Zola knelt down and brushed the dust away with her hand. The chest was heavier than she expected, and the wood felt rough and ancient. It looked like it had been sitting there untouched for many years. "Grandmother," Zola called softly, "what is this box?" Her grandmother looked over for a moment, her expression suddenly serious. "Oh, that old thing," she replied quietly. "It has been there for a very long time. I have not opened it in many years." But Zola's curiosity grew stronger. With careful hands, she slowly lifted the lid of the chest. The hinges creaked softly as the box opened. Inside, she found neatly folded cloth wrapped in a thin layer of fabric to protect it from dust. When Zola gently unfolded the cloth, her eyes widened with surprise. Inside the chest was something she had never seen before in her entire life. It was a beautiful red dress. The color was deep and bright, like the glowing African sunset. The fabric looked soft and elegant, shining slightly under the light coming through the hut's doorway. Zola stared at it in amazement. In a village where everyone wore black, she had just discovered something completely different, something bold, colorful, and mysterious. Zola carefully lifted the dress from the wooden chest, holding it gently in her hands as if it were something precious. The fabric felt soft and smooth, unlike the rough black clothes she wore every day. As the sunlight from the doorway touched the cloth, the color seemed to glow even brighter. It was the most beautiful thing Zola had ever seen. The dress was deep red, the color of a blazing sunset over the African savanna. Small patterns were stitched along the edges, delicate and elegant, showing the careful work of someone who had made it with great love. Zola had never seen clothing like this before. In her village, everything was black, simple and plain. Her heart began to beat faster. She held the dress against herself and imagined what it would look like if she wore it. For a moment, she felt both excitement and fear. She remembered the stories told by the elders, that bright colors could bring bad luck to the village. But as she stared at the dress, Zola felt something different. It did not look dangerous or cursed. Instead, it felt warm and full of life, like a forgotten piece of happiness hidden away for many years. "Why would anyone hide something so beautiful?" she whispered to herself. Her grandmother watched quietly from across the room. For a moment, she said nothing, as if lost in old memories. Finally, she sighed softly. "Long ago," her grandmother said slowly, "our village was not always like this. People used to wear colors, bright and joyful colors." Zola looked up with surprise. "Then why did it stop?" she asked. Her grandmother did not answer immediately. She simply looked at the red dress with thoughtful eyes. But Zola could feel it in her heart. This dress was not just a piece of clothing. It was a forgotten part of the village's past, and perhaps the beginning of a change no one had dared to imagine. As Zola continued to hold the red dress in her hands, she noticed something else inside the wooden chest. Tucked carefully beneath the folded fabric was a small, yellowed piece of paper. The edges were old and fragile, as if it had been hidden there for many years. Curious, Zola gently picked up the paper and unfolded it. The writing was faded, but she could still read the words slowly. It looked like a message written by someone from long ago. The note said, "Our village was once full of colors. We wore red during celebrations, blue during the rainy season, and green when the harvest came. Colors brought us joy and reminded us that life was beautiful." Zola read the words again and again, her heart beating with excitement. This was completely different from the stories told by the elders. According to them, bright colors were dangerous and brought misfortune. But this old note spoke of happiness, celebrations, and life filled with color. "Grandmother," Zola said softly, holding up the note. "Did people really wear colors before?" Her grandmother slowly walked closer and looked at the paper. For a long moment, she stayed silent, as if remembering something from the distant past. "Yes," she finally whispered. "Long ago, before your time, our village was not afraid of colors." Zola's eyes widened with curiosity. "Then why did everyone stop?" she asked. Her grandmother sighed deeply and sat down beside her. "Fear," she said quietly. "Sometimes people believe stories for so long that they forget the truth." Zola looked again at the red dress and the old note in her hands. If the village had once been full of colors, then maybe the tradition of wearing only black was not as powerful as everyone believed. And in that moment, a bold thought slowly began to grow in Zola's mind. What if someone dared to bring color back to the village? That night, Zola could not stop thinking about the red dress and the old note she had found in the wooden chest. As she lay on her small bed inside the quiet hut, the words from the note echoed in her mind. Our village was once full of colors. If that was true, then why was everyone still afraid? Outside, the moonlight covered the village in a soft silver glow. The huts were silent, and the cool night wind moved gently through the acacia trees. Zola stared at the ceiling, her heart filled with questions. Part of her felt afraid. The elders had always warned the villagers that bright colors would bring bad luck. If she wore the red dress, people might become angry. They might even blame her if something bad happened. But another part of her heart felt something stronger than fear. It felt like courage. Zola slowly sat up and looked toward the wooden chest in the corner of the room. The red dress was still inside, quietly waiting, as if it had been hidden all these years for this very moment. She walked over to the chest and gently lifted the dress again. The fabric felt light and warm in her hands. When she held it against herself, she imagined walking through the village wearing it. The thought made her nervous, but also excited. What if the elders are wrong? She whispered to herself. The more she thought about it, the more she realized something important. Nothing would ever change if everyone remained too afraid to try. Finally, Zola took a deep breath and made a decision. The next morning, she would wear the red dress. Not to cause trouble, not to break the village apart, but to show that perhaps the world was meant to be full of colors, not only black. And with that brave decision, Zola unknowingly prepared to change the future of her entire village. The next morning, the sun slowly rose over the African savanna, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and gold. As the village began to wake, people stepped outside their huts to start their daily work. Women prepared water pots, men gathered tools for the fields, and children ran along the dusty paths. Everything seemed normal, until Zola stepped out of her hut. But today, something was different. Instead of the usual black dress that everyone wore, Zola was wearing the bright red dress she had found in the wooden chest. The fabric shone beautifully under the morning sunlight, glowing like a flame in the middle of the quiet village. For a moment, no one spoke. A young boy carrying a basket stopped in the middle of the path. A woman at the well froze with her water pot in her hands. Even the elders sitting under the large acacia tree turned their heads slowly. The entire village stared at Zola. They had never seen such a color before in their village streets. Whispers quickly spread among the villagers. "Look, what is she wearing? Is that red? Why would she wear such a color?" Some people looked shocked. Others looked frightened. A few seemed angry, as if Zola had broken a sacred rule that had existed for generations. But Zola continued walking calmly through the village. Her heart was beating fast, but she kept her head high. She knew people were watching her, judging her, and perhaps even fearing what she had done. Yet the red dress moved gently in the wind as she walked, bright and fearless against the sea of black clothing surrounding her. In that moment, the quiet and colorless village experienced something it had not seen in many generations. As Zola walked through the village wearing the bright red dress, the whispers around her grew louder. People gathered along the dusty paths, staring at her with wide eyes. Some villagers looked curious, but many looked worried and uneasy. Soon, word of what Zola had done reached the village elders. The elders were the most respected people in the village. They were the guardians of the old traditions and the ones who reminded everyone about the rule of wearing black. Every important decision in the village passed through them. That morning, The elders were sitting beneath the large acacia tree in the center of the village when they saw Zola approaching. The moment they noticed the red dress, their expressions changed. One of the elders slowly stood up, leaning on his wooden staff. His voice was deep and serious as he spoke. "Zola," he said firmly, "do you know what you are doing?" The villagers fell silent. Everyone waited for her answer. Zola felt her heart beating loudly in her chest, but she did not turn back. She looked respectfully at the elders and stood tall. Another elder shook his head with concern. "Young girl," he said, "our people wear black for a reason. This rule has protected our village for many years. Wearing bright colors could bring bad luck to us all." Murmurs spread through the crowd again. Some villagers nodded in agreement, believing the elders' warning. Others looked uncertain, glancing at the red dress shining brightly under the sun. But Zola remembered the old note she had found in the wooden chest, the one that spoke about a time when the village was full of colors and happiness. Taking a deep breath, she finally spoke. "I only want to know the truth," she said calmly. And with those simple words, she unknowingly challenged a belief that had ruled the village for generations. After Zola spoke, a hush fell over the villagers. Everyone stared at her, waiting for the elders to respond. The air was heavy with tension, and the sun seemed to shine more brightly on her red dress, making it almost glow against the sea of black around her. Finally, the oldest woman in the village, who had rarely spoken in public, slowly rose from her seat under the acacia tree. Her eyes, deep with years of memory, scanned the crowd before resting on Zola. "My child," she said softly, her voice shaking slightly, "you are brave to ask questions that no one else dares to ask. But there is something you must know." The villagers leaned in closer, curious and silent. "This village, it was not always as it is now," the old woman continued. "Long before your time, our people wore colors. We celebrated with red, blue, green, and yellow. We danced and laughed, and our lives were full of brightness." The elders shifted uneasily. Many had never questioned the tradition, believing it was their duty to preserve it. But the old woman's words reminded everyone that the story of fear had begun long ago, perhaps based on an old misunderstanding or an exaggerated tale of misfortune. Zola listened carefully, her eyes wide with hope. "The black clothing," the woman said gently, "was meant as a protection, yes, but it was born from fear, not from truth. The colors were never dangerous. They were always a part of our lives." A quiet murmur ran through the villagers. Some seemed relieved, others shocked. Many realized that for years they had blindly followed a rule that no longer made sense. Zola held her head high. She knew now that her courage to wear red was not reckless. It was a step toward uncovering the truth and giving the village a chance to remember what had been lost. And in that moment, the seeds of change began to take root in every heart around her. After the truth was revealed, a quiet excitement spread through the village. People began to look around at the dusty streets, the clay huts, and each other's black clothing with new eyes. For the first time in generations, they began to imagine a world where color could exist among them once more. Zola stood in the center of the village, her red dress glowing brightly in the sunlight. Children peeked out from behind huts, their eyes wide with curiosity and wonder. Slowly, one small girl stepped forward, holding a piece of blue cloth her mother had kept hidden for years. With a shy smile, she draped it around her shoulders. Then another child found a green scarf tucked in an old basket and began to wear it proudly. Soon, a few women added colorful beads to their hair, and some men found old fabrics in muted tones and experimented with them for the first time. The village, which had been monochrome for so long, was beginning to shimmer with color. The elders watched quietly, some still unsure, but many realized that the colors brought not danger, but joy. The villagers began to laugh, sharing smiles that had been buried under fear and habit. The children played games using the bright fabrics, running along the dusty paths like streaks of rainbow across the village. Zola smiled as she saw the transformation. Her brave decision to wear red had inspired others to rethink what they had always believed. One by one, the villagers embraced the colors that had been hidden from them for generations. By the end of the day, the village was no longer just black. It was alive with red, blue, green, and yellow, with every person adding their own touch of brightness to the once dark streets. As the days passed, the village transformed in ways no one had imagined. The once colorless streets now shimmered with bright fabrics, and laughter echoed across the dusty paths. Children played freely in dresses and scarves of red, blue, green, and yellow. The elders smiled quietly, realizing that the old fear had kept them from joy for far too long. Zola became a symbol of courage in the village. People no longer saw her simply as a curious girl. They saw her as the one who had dared to question tradition and bring change. Her red dress had become legendary, not just as a piece of clothing, but as a statement of bravery, hope, and freedom. Even the villagers who had once been most afraid of breaking tradition began to experiment with color. Farmers wore bright wraps while working in the fields. Mothers decorated their homes with vibrant fabrics. Children's laughter and colorful clothing filled every corner of the village. The black clothing that had dominated for generations was now just one part of a world full of color. Zola herself continued to explore and experiment with colors, teaching the younger children that courage was not about strength alone, but about believing in what was right. She encouraged them to think for themselves, to be brave, and to celebrate life with joy. Stories of her bravery spread beyond the village. Travelers and visitors spoke of the young girl in red who had changed an entire community. Her courage inspired other villages to question old fears and embrace hope. And though many years would pass, everyone in the village remembered that one girl, with a red dress and a brave heart, had changed their world forever. She had proven that fear could be overcome, that joy could return, and that a single courageous soul could leave a mark that lasted for generations. The village would never forget Zola, the girl who dared, the girl who dreamed, and the girl who changed everything.